Good evening, everybody. Monday morning quarterback, episode 29 already. We are going to dive back into how to understand your shock dyno sheets. Today we're out in the shop. We're going to show you some different shocks on the dyno and how the same shock can give you different numbers depending on how you dyno it. So it's important to understand what you're looking at on your dyno sheet, and we'll dive into that. So last week we were out at IMS for the BC 39, and that was a super cool event. Kind of had to battle Mother Nature, which was a little bit of a downer, but still a great event, and hoping they do that again next year. Had a big race atmosphere and was really good for short track racing. Zeb Wise won the Stoops Pursuit the first night on CSI shocks. We didn't win the final night, but we had 10 of the 24 starters, which was something we're proud of. Earlier in the week, last week, we headed out to Boone, Iowa to work with Bobby Harris and his dad Bob at Bob Harris Enterprises. They're a big dealer for us out there in the dirt modified scene. Got to see a little bit of racing. We were hampered by rain out there as well. But we got a lot of stuff accomplished out there, and super cool. Jake McBurney won the Sport Mod A main on Saturday night at the Super Nationals with CSI shocks tuned by BHE. So really cool there. So recap, 2 weeks ago it's been. Last week we went Facebook Live from the Super Nationals. Didn't have the ability to do it at the shop because I was traveling, so we kind of just did an open session. But 2 weeks ago, the first segment of Shock Dyno sheet information, we talked about a number of things. So I just want to go over that and review real quick before we dive into the new stuff. So those of you who didn't watch that or just need a refresher after 2 weeks, a couple of the important takeaways with that particular session was when you're looking at your dyno sheet, any positive number is going to be your compression and a negative number will be your rebound. And for our core markets, quarter midgets, micro sprints, midget sprint cars, Silver Crown, you should focus at looking at that 3-inch number on all the corners, and we'd like you to start looking at the 1-inch on your left rear rebound. So that's a good start. We look at everything, and as you get more advanced, you'll look at more numbers too, but that's a good baseline to start looking at numbers. So 3-inch everywhere, and then additionally a 1-inch left rear rebound. So positive numbers, compression, negative rebound, look at the 3-inch. So that's kind of a recap of last week. If you missed that, be sure to go back on our Facebook page and check it out. We appreciate everybody that shared it. Super awesome, had 130 some odd shares and like 8,000 views. So those of you guys that are watching, please share our videos. It helps us get it out there to the masses, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to help educate everybody, and that's something that we're going to do more of moving into 2019. So we're going to dive right in, and I got a left rear gas shock on the dyno, and a couple of things that are important to know is there's several different ways you can dyno a shock, and one of the things I'm going to show you now is no matter what this shock is, depending on how you dyno it, you'll yield slightly different results. So we'll leave the same shock on here that's very repeatable, and we'll dyno it a couple different ways, and you'll see the numbers change. So it's like an engine dyno. You can have a 900 horsepower engine on your engine builder's dyno, take it to the guy down the street, same engine, and now it's an 820 horsepower engine. So depending on the parameters you set when you dyno the shock, you can get slightly different numbers. So this is a gas shock. We typically dyno this at 10 inches per second, CVP. So there's one of the big differences is your builder dynoing at CVP or PVP? There's a big difference there, and we will show you both and explain both. The other is the speed. If you're dynoing at 6 inches versus 10 inches, it's going to give you a different number if you're doing a CVP test. We dyno CVP here for a number of reasons. But we'll go into that a little bit more. And then at the end, if we have time, we're going to talk about the difference between a linear and a digressive shock or piston that's in the shock, and high speed versus low speed. So we'll get started here. We're going to dyno this shock at 10-inch CVP, And we always run a gas test when we dyno our gas shocks. It just takes the rod pressure out of the equation. We do it more for a production. We don't have to actually set the gas pressure every time the shock goes on the dyno. So it does a warm up first, gets the shock to a certain ambient temperature, and then now it's running its gas test where it's moving slow there, and now it's going to do a data acquisition run. So you'll see the shock after it finishes its gas test here, it's going to speed up to 10 inches per second. This is a CVP test. So CVP means continuous velocity plot. So it's plotting the graph the whole way up to 10 inches per second and down, where a PVP is a peak velocity plot. And when we do that in a minute, you'll see it's going to run the shock at 1 inches per second, and then it's going to run it at 3 inches per second, and then it's going to run it at 7 and 10. You can set those numbers to whatever you want, but that's the test I created for this. So I'm going to show you the average graph here. So that's the average graph on this left rear shock on a CVP. Okay, we're going to do a 6-inch CVP test next to show you when you slow the shock down to 6 inches, it's going to give us a little bit different number. And then when we do the PVP, it's going to give us a lot different number. So the reason we do CVP, it plots the graph the whole way. It acquires that data a little bit quicker. As many shocks as we build through the day, that helps us speed up the dyno process a little bit. Certain IndyCar teams I've worked for, the engineer might want a PVP test if we're really trying to hone in on one particular velocity. A place like the Speedway where you're seeing almost the same velocity around the whole track because it's so smooth, we might just do a PVP at a couple different velocities. But for the most part, teams will use a CVP. So I'm going to change the color of the second graph so you can see it. So you can see how much different the low speed looks dynoing it at 6 inches versus 10. So this red graph, I'll deselect the first one we did. It stops at 6 inches per second. And when we add the black, so you can see out here at the high speed, it's very similar, but the low speed is much different. And that's due to the rate of acceleration on the dyno, okay? So now we're going to do a PVP test. And the PVP is going to go to 10, so we will do a comparison of the 10-inch CVP versus PVP. And I will show you an easy way to identify on your dyno sheets whether yours is CVP or PVP. And it's important to understand, it's not that one's right or one's wrong, it's just important that you know what you got. Because if you have some of your dyno sheets are CVP and some are PVP, you're comparing apples to oranges when you're trying to analyze what shocks should go on your race car or what shock's working good on your race car. We'll get customers sometimes that'll call and they'll have a 3-inch number they want and they're dead set and very specific about that 3-inch number, but they don't know where they got that 3-inch number or what dyno sheet they were looking at. Because if it was a PVP, if it was dynoed at 6 instead of 10, it's going to be different, and we don't want to build them a shock that then they go back and put on their dyno it in their parameters, and now it's not what they wanted. So it's important to know what you got there. So you can see on a PVP test how it's really like a dot to dot. So we took a sampling at 1, and there it is. And then we took a sampling at 3, and then we did one at 6 and one at 10. So it puts a data point at each of those spots and then kind of draws an imaginary line between them, okay? So here is the black graph is the CVP and the purple is the PVP. So if we're telling you to look at 1-inch rebound, and you're used to looking at our graph, and it's 256 pounds at 1, and now all of a sudden you've got a dyno sheet that's PVP, and it's 368 at 1. That's substantially different. So it's really important to know, if you see your dyno sheet and it looks kind of like that dot to dot, it's more than likely a PVP test. A CVP will look more fluid. Okay, so that's important to know whether your graph was a PVP or a CVP. I'm going to throw a different shock up here, and we will kind of explain the differences between a linear shock and a digressive shock. Just go back to our 10-inch normal gas, and we'll explain the differences. Once we're done dynoing here, I'll answer your questions as far as what the main differences are there and what you should be looking for. Again, I want to reiterate, PVP versus CVP, there's not one right and one wrong. There's a reason Rohrig offers both. It just depends on how you want to look at the data. We just want to make sure that when you're looking at your catalog of shocks, that they're all dynoed in the same fashion, so you're comparing apples to apples and you really know what you got. So again, the dyno's running the gas test. Now in our twin tube shocks, we normally don't do a gas test because there's no rod pressure there. That's another variable. If your builder dynos his gas shocks without a gas test, it'll be a slightly different number than if you do. Okay, so this particular shock has a fair bit of bleed in it, but this is more of a linear build, okay? It's almost borderline progressive because it's soft and then it blows off, but it's linear. So as the shock builds velocity, it builds rate. Now when we look at, we're just going to focus, I'll move these to make it a little easier to understand. It's actually not a very good example. Let me open up. That's a better example. All right. So we'll F9 it here, so we're looking at the average. Let me get rid of this PVP. The PVPs always want to pop back up. Okay. I'll move this. I'm hitting all the wrong buttons here. I'm going to move this red graph down so you can see. So if I move these down to the same point, and this is just for comparison, the black is a digressive curve. So it's got a lot of low speed and then it blows off, okay? You can see, it'd be better if I compared those. There we go. You can see that the red, it continues to build rate. So the blue graph here, you know, it's about 400 pounds at 2.5 inches, and then out here at 6, it's only like 425. So it's not building much rate over that distance, where the red graph at 2.5, it's maybe 205, and then out here at 6, it's like 325. So it's building a lot more rate. That's linear. The other is digressive. We run a digressive typically on the left rear rebound because we want so much low speed for control. If it wasn't digressive, we would be well over 1,000 pounds at 10 inches per second. When you'd hit a hole, it'd almost have enough rebound to hold the tire out of the track. And that's nothing good there. So we blow that rebound off, so if you do hit a hole, it will let the tire release. But that's the main difference between linear and digressive. And then the other thing we will show you is low speed versus high speed. So typically when we're talking low speed of a shock, we're in this 2 inch per second and under. That's the low speed, and that's typically what the driver feels the most, especially in this turnaround point. That's where the shock will spend the most time as it goes from compression to rebound. It speeds up and slows down and is crossing through this area the most. So that is what the driver will feel in the seat of his pants. Now, what you visually will see as a mechanic or a crew guy is more of this mid-range and high-speed number, because when the car hits the cushion, goes through a hole, the shock is running at a higher velocity, and that's what you'll see on the racetrack. If a car is bouncing or not stable on the cushion, typically that's a high-speed adjustment there. So, covered a bunch of stuff there. I'm going to take the camera back over from Sam so I can answer some questions for you guys, and we will go from there. So let me focus. We will say thank you to Sam for being our handy dandy cameraman tonight. And Mayday. Somebody knows your nickname already, Sam. Okay, I'm just scrolling up to see who's asked questions. Dave Sharpley's tuned in. Hello, Dave. Our buddy from Sharp Advantage. Ed, Colin and Nolan Mitchell's grandpa. Thank you for tuning in, Ed. All right. So we covered a bunch of stuff there. What questions do you guys have pertaining to that? I'm almost wondering if I should move because of the glare. We'll kind of move over here due to the glare. Good afternoon, Marcus Thomas. It's evening here, and Marcus, I don't want to hear anything about the Saints. We've got the most prolific offense in the NFL, and we couldn't stop a Pop Warner team's offense. Okay, anybody that's tuned in have questions about how the shocks are dynoed, anything we covered 2 weeks ago, or anything we covered this evening? We're here to answer all your questions. And if you don't get your question in, or you watch this after the fact, feel free to send me a private message on Facebook, or shoot me a message at CSI or an email. We're definitely here to help. Neil. Crossover point and its importance, left rear non-wing. Neil, are you referring to the clamp force in the shock or the 0 point on the rebound? Or are you referring to where it crosses from compression to rebound? Please specify there and I will go into detail on that. So the non-wing cars, we typically run more rebound than a wing car. We're looking for more control since we don't have the wing holding the car down. So we do run more clamp force or 0 point. I will come back over here and show you guys what I mean by clamp force. So this is compression. Okay, so while we're talking about clamp force, this is the compression open, rebound close graph, okay? And so this number right down here, your 0 point on rebound close, that's the clamp force. So that's the amount of force it's going to take to get the shock going the other direction. That's an important number for any left rear open wheel dirt car. But we look at that a lot on a non-wing sprint car as well. Okay, so to answer Neil's question, switching from compression to rebound. So Neil, there's nothing particular with a non-wing sprint car as far as that's concerned. This goes for any car. So as the shock's working on the car, it goes from compression to rebound. So it speeds up, and then when it changes direction, it stops momentarily to go the other direction, okay? So the shock works the same on the car as it does on the dyno. And when it goes to change directions there, it's going from 0 and speeding back up. So you spend a lot of time in that crossover section of the shock from compression to rebound. So the low speed numbers there are what you're going to feel the most. Okay, typically we run a little stiffer compression in a non-wing car than we do a wing car. However, if you feel like that's too stiff, we can certainly soften that, or your shock builder can soften that for you. But that's probably what you're going to be feeling in that area, is too soft or too stiff on compression, or the same on rebound, because you do spend a lot of time in that crossover point on pretty much every shock on your car. Anybody else that's tuned in have questions pertaining to shock dyno? I think we were able to cover most of it in 2 weeks. I don't know if we have a need to go into week 3 on this. However, if we missed something that you wanted to learn, definitely get with us, and we will certainly answer that question for you. And then we'll come up with another new topic. I've got a list of Monday morning quarterback episodes based on feedback from you guys, so we certainly appreciate that. Dawn, great question. So too much 1-inch rebound on a non-wing car, midget or sprint car, will tend to make the car hop. So as the car is wanting to change directions, we're holding it down with rebound, and we'll get what motocross guys would refer to like as a pack effect. So it's almost holding that tire up out of the track. It's not letting it return to the surface as quick as we want, so we get a hop or a bounce. Typically, that is what will happen if we get too much 1-inch rebound on the right rear. So you start wanting to dial rebound in the right rear, especially on a non-wing car when the track gets slick, to try to get some more grip and get more even rear drive up off the corner. But when you get too much, you can get a hop into the car. So that is what that's from. David, we've got 5 Rohrig shock dynos, and that's definitely what has worked well for us. We're getting a new CTW on order. Those are the guys who were the engineers at Rohrig, and they've been absolutely phenomenal as far as helping us with tech support and everything as we've transitioned to Windows 10, etc. And so we're going to get one of their dynos to use on our quarter midget bay, and then eventually we'll run their software on all of our Rohrig stuff. But as far as we're concerned, for a high-end application, Rohrig's kind of the only, or CTW is kind of the only way to go. They're the industry standard. Every professional team is using that. An entry-level dyno to keep in your trailer would be a Maxwell. It runs off 110 power, which is more user-friendly than a Rohrig or a CTW where you need 220. And it's a lot of guys have Maxwells in their trailer, although CTW offers a couple nice cost-effective options that will work well also. I'm not extremely familiar with the AccuForce. I really like their bar dyno they made a few years ago. We have a Maxwell bar dyno, but I'm not really familiar with their shock dynos. Harley, right rear weight or left rear weight on a non-wing car? If you pulled 10 of the top crew chiefs in the pit area, 5 would say right rear weight, 5 would say left rear weight. My advice to you would be what feels best for your particular driver, okay? I personally would typically start the night with right rear weight and go more towards left rear weight as the night track slicked off, but that's really a driver preference. I've seen guys win a ton of races with right rear weight in a non-wing car, so it really is preference, what makes your driver feel comfortable, and what works in conjunction with your bar combo and your shock package. Anybody else that's tuned in have questions? Please, again, share our videos if you're enjoying them. We want everybody to see them, and that definitely helps us spread the word. Brian Gray. I'll get to Cam's question in a second. Reading through it. Okay, so Brian, adding spring rate doesn't necessarily make the car looser. So I spent a lot of time at a 7-post shaker rig with both a stock car and an Indy car in my time as a shock engineer in those fields. And typically softer spring rate will yield more grip to a certain point, and then it goes the other way. You get more oscillation, but it doesn't load the tire adequately, and you lose grip. What we're trying to achieve with the bump rubber on the right rear is we're typically softer than we want on that corner to initiate roll, and then the car doesn't have enough spring rate there to load the tire adequately. So we're almost running like a dual stage spring. We're softer to get the roll, and then as it gets in the bump rubber and starts to load the bump rubber, the spring rate's increasing and we're loading the tire. So that's what we're trying to do with the bump rubber on the right rear, and it works very, very effectively. Two left rear shocks with the same 1-inch number on rebound but different 3-inch number. Excuse me. Cam, in my experience, you might not even notice a difference. It depends on how big the split is. For example, if you've got one shock that is 180 at 1 inch and 350 at 3, and the other one's 200 at 1 and 300 at 3, so stiffer at low speed, softer at 3, that one's going to feel like it's got more rebound than the other one because you spend so much time at that 1-inch number. And you don't often see a velocity very high on left rear rebound. You will on compression, but the shock doesn't run really fast in the rebound direction on the left rear. I would say where that would affect you the most would be corner entry. That's where you're going to see the fastest entry to the middle of the corner. That's where you're going to see the fastest rebound movement on a wing sprint car. But I would tune more around the 1-inch number unless your 3 inches are really out of whack. I almost exclusively look at what the clamp in the 1 inch is on a wing car anymore. Unless the 3 inch is like 100 pounds different than what I want, I don't really worry about it that much. How much of a left rear tie down on right rear weight? Harley, that might be a better one. If you just give me a call, I can go through that with you. Typically, our non-wing shocks are in the 500 to 550 range at 3 inch. But if you have some detailed questions about shock numbers and blocking a non-wing car, just let us know. So Brian, in terms of running the bump stops on asphalt, we've run them on the rear of asphalt cars and been pretty successful at Little 500 doing that, especially when you get a full fuel load. But I haven't done a whole lot of testing outside of that. There's just not a lot of pavement sprint car racing around us. We worked with some on the front on wing cars with Davey Hamilton's team several years ago, but that's something I would definitely like to do some more of, is the new style bump stops on the pavement cars. So Cam, if you're running the progressive kit, right rear and left rear on a wing car seems to work really well. We're able to hold the attitude in the car a lot better. Typically we're running like a 3/4 to a 1 inch gap with the new progressive kit on the right rear, and it seems to work really, really well. Jeff, I don't totally understand your question. Bump rubbers come into effect most when the track slicks off as far as adding grip, but they can help with limiting travel on a real heavy track with a left rear bump rubber, keeping the rail from dragging. On a modified, we do add rebound as the track slicks off. If you take too much, add too much compression or take too much out of the left rear, it seems like you lose drive up off the corner. So we've kind of been adding a little bit of rebound to both rear shocks on the modified stuff when it gets slick. Cam, it can make the car tight. I don't recommend really getting into the double bump rubbers left rear and right rear until the track starts to slick off. Now if it's slick to a cushion, I think it'll work really well for you. It seems to help take some of the hop out of the car. But you know, when the track gets a big cushion and you're trying to tighten it up for being slick, yeah, you're going to have to be careful no matter what adjustment you make there. J, compression adjustable right rear on a micro. So that's something that a lot of our panhard customers do. The cars tend to get pretty tight on the right rear, and you're able to free it up a little bit by having a compression adjustable right rear versus a rebound. I know that's something that a lot of our customers that run a panhard car still do to this day, is run a compression adjustable. So if a double's not an option, those guys will run a compression adjustable, where most of our Jacob's ladder style micros are running a rebound adjustable right rear if they're not on a double. So micros are kind of unique, where there's two distinctively different rear geometries and rear suspension styles with either a panhard or a Jacob's ladder there. So both are successful. Just depends on what your style is and what you can get to work on that particular track. So if there's no other questions, we'll sign off for tonight. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Hope you have a fantastic week. Good luck wherever you're racing, and be sure to share our videos. Thank you.